Hey, it's Sam, and welcome to the third video in the P5 Masterclass on the Level 1 certification training as well. In this video, I'm going to be talking about principle stacking. We started getting into the principles in the last video. I'm going to go over the way to stack these important principles so that you can learn astrology at a high level, and we're going to be even looking at the chart here. I'll tell you who this chart is in a little bit. But we're going to go over that and apply these principles and stack these principles in this chart. There's also a download here where you can see who the chart is. I have both the South Indian and the North Indian style. So we're going to unpack this in great detail. Again, you know, the reason for these videos is because we're going to be starting the certification course soon. And again, we've had more than 200 students graduate in the last several years, and they've learned this systematic approach to read charts consistently so that you can engineer your success and actually know how to read charts and understand what you're looking at over and over again, so it's not just this hit or miss astrology student approach. You've probably been, grappling with this, consistency issue, maybe grabbing little bits of information here and there, snacking on astrology videos instead of being a savvy scientific astrologer, because this is best approached as a science. Astrology is a science, and it's approached scientifically, particularly when you get into all of these principles and you start stacking them correctly. Then again, your success is guaranteed. When my students look at charts now, they're not confused. They don't just fumble around and wonder where to begin. There's a very systematic and structured approach to reading a chart that starts at a particular point, and then you apply these principles at that point. Then the next point, you apply these principles there. And again, they are all elegant structures that are unfolded sequentially, just like anything else that you do that you've mastered, that you've been taught, that you've been able to comprehend. The thing that really allows us to learn is a system that breaks things down into their sort of bite-sized portions. But again, rather than just taking a bite from this and a bite from that, like the online sort of video snacking that you might be doing, instead you take that same energy and you take this bite and you go deeper and deeper and deeper into a system. Then your energy, rather than being dispersed and scattered, it's concentrated and it goes deep. More depth, less width. So as I said in the last video, one of the things about what's called the Rajasic guna is it's kind of this side-to-side motion that's sort of going nowhere. And it's very easy in life to sort of go nowhere. We have an interest in something, but we just kind of, we don't really know how to be focused and go deep. The way to go deep is to sort of slow down and find a system and a teaching and follow it. So you can see that in my teaching approach, which is really my life's work, is to teach astrologers. I've really spent all of my time learning how to teach astrology well and systematically so that you can get repeatable results over and over again. And so in this video, I'm going to be talking about these principles and how they work together, and again, how astrology and understanding these principles won't just help you learn to read astrology charts well, but they teach you about life. And almost all of my students report, particularly the first part of the certification course where we're just unfolding all of the sacred principles, when we're looking in the text about all of the implications of elements, gunas, karma, and all of the practices that have developed around yoga and Ayurveda and astrology, and the implications with the levels of consciousness and awareness and the chakras, all of this, it transforms people's lives, because this is transformative teaching. This isn't just like learning, how to write computer code or how to do a little thing. It's not like how to do a little trick. The study of astrology is the study of how spirit takes form, of the divine universe, as we talked about in the first video. In the The ancient rishis, the ancient, sages described exactly how life is laid out, and it's very clear, it's very systematic. We're a product of our karma, and it comes down through the planets. One of the names, actually the name of Lord Vishnu in Brihat Parashara is Janardhan. So Lord Vishnu, as the 9 planets, is called Janardhan, which means the one who destroys the illusion of birth. Destroys the illusion of birth, which means we all have this illusion that we were born and that we're going to die. And Janardhan is the incarnate, or the emanation of Vishnu, that destroys that illusion. And it's the science of astrology that allows us to destroy that illusion. So rather than just being attached to this form and this limited body that's going to perish one day, we extend upward. So even rather than astrology being something that we're trying to pull down and possess, get some of this for me so that I'm happier and I get more money, or I have this thing, or my kids are okay, and we worry about life more. As I said in the last video, if we're not careful, or actually it was in the first video, the misuse or misunderstanding of astrology can make us even more blind. So we have to be careful. When we study it correctly, and we study all of these principles, these divine principles, rather than being constricted and collapsed and like this, we are like, whoosh, our attention and our heart opens and extends toward something bigger. And this is what astrology is supposed to be. It's supposed to be something that extends your mind and consciousness. That's what it is. That's what the practice is for. So again, as we do this, you will learn to be a scientific astrologer, to approach it scientifically rather than this hit or miss student who is relying on hunches and assumptions and guesses and sort of flailing in the dark, not really understanding the chart. It's totally within your grasp. You can totally do it, as many of my students have done in the past. And so we'll start some of that journey right now, looking at these principles and stacking some of these principles, and then looking at a chart over here and seeing how we can apply it to the chart. Now, this is the chart of Princess Diana, Lady Diana, Princess Diana, and we're going to apply some of these principles to this chart here. This is the South Indian chart. I also have the North Indian chart on the download. But we see these same principles, elements. We have the 5 elements. Fire, or it's, I was saying fire because she has a fire chart. But, of course, it's earth, water, fire, air, and earth. And then gunas are tamas, rajas, and sattva, but they relate to body, mind, and spirit. And then the planets themselves are the universal principles through which the karmas unfold, through which the power descends. And then the signs emanate from the planets. Each one of the signs are ruled by planets. And then houses, once we have a rising sign, then we have houses. So then the signs themselves become houses. And then karma, of course, that's a universal principle, how our actions are compelled from our idea about what's true. And then we're constantly put in new situations, and we must act in accordance with our nature, and hopefully in a more evolved sense. Evolution, karma and evolution, they go hand in hand. We evolve through our karmas. Distance is a principle. You see, when Lady Di was born, Mercury and Venus were very close. Jupiter, Saturn, very close. Rahu and Mars, very close. So distance is an important principle. Opposition, things that are opposite each other. For instance, Venus and Mars are opposite forces, opposite energies. When you start looking at an astrology chart, there are things that are opposite other things. Opposition is an important principle in life. Speed, very important principle. For instance, the concept of retrograde is very much related to speed, or planets that move fast. Mercury moves fast. The moon moves fast. So those parts of us move fast. The rising sign moves fast. It's the earth turning. And then polarity. which also means like masculine and feminine, inner and outer, opposites, which is also here opposition, but also just the polarity of things. So these are a few universal principles. There are more, but these are a few that we talk about. And you know, a good place to start when you're talking about astrology is the planets, the signs and the houses. They're kind of organizing structures around which the elements and gunas revolve. So, for example, in Lady Di's chart, this is Sagittarius. Sagittarius, for example, is ruled by the planet Jupiter, and it's a fiery planet, and it's a fiery sign. So the fire is the element of that sign, and Sattva is the guna of that sign. So, for example, its motivation is towards Sattva, or higher purpose. It's ruled by Jupiter, which is about optimism and hope. It's fiery in nature, which is external, which is masculine polarity. Means it's motivated to seek out, because fire is masculine. So just those things help us remember, instead of trying to just throw out a little tidbit. Oh, Sagittarius, they're you know, happy-go-lucky, like to travel, or some little thing that you might have heard about them. What you do when you try to explain it is you hang it on these principles, and you stack these principles. So someone could say about Sagittarius, about Lady Di's rising sign, you could say, oh, she's ruled by Jupiter, which means she's, and then you give a statement about Jupiter, which means she's motivated toward finding the good and being optimistic and hopeful, looking for things that are inspiring and hopeful. And it's a fire sign, which shows that she will be very active and fiery and passionate in that pursuit, but she might also get frustrated if things aren't moving fast enough. That's the nature of Sagittarius. She'll be very that's the nature of fire. She'll be very individual, because fire is very much about our individual personal power. So she'll pursue that inspiration and hope in a very individual, personalized way, where she's trying to find the pure truth and pursue it. She might get impatient if it's not going fast enough. And again, it's motivated by that inspiration and purpose. So this is just a couple qualities of her rising sign. Then we would see, because it's ruled by a planet, it's ruled by the planet Jupiter. Then we would say, when she was born, that fiery nature of the planet that rules her, because it's her rising sign ruler, goes into Capricorn. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, which is an energy of restriction, an awareness of death, an awareness of endings. It's heavy, it's serious, it's worried. But this makes a person very sensitive, because they realize the suffering in life. They see the suffering in life, and it makes them very sensitive and will want to heal. And when she was born, it was also retrograde. That's the issue of speed. It was also retrograde, which means that it was actually very close to the earth at that time, but it was moving backwards. So that sense of identity and self, that hopeful identity and self that she's trying to access, is confusing. It's moving backwards. It's not. It becomes an internal psychological structure where it's hard for her to move forward with those qualities of her rising sign. So her very identity is sort of confusing, and her life is trying to find her true self. And basically her true self as this inspired person, because the ruling planet is Jupiter, all of those qualities of inspiration, like I said. And when she was born, that ruling planet was also joined Saturn. Distance, important. Planets join, they get next to each other, they affect each other. So not only is this Jupiter retrograde, her ruling planet retrograde, which would push down a lot of that hope, at least initially, it would make it harder for her to access that inspiration and purpose. Not only is it retrograde, causing some confusion, but it's also with Saturn, which is the ruler of this sign that's somewhat heavy. So she'll tend to feel this heaviness there, and she'll tend to feel held back and restricted, and she might be in situations where she can't express her inspiration and freedom and purpose, and it'll frustrate her. She'll feel the frustrations of not being able to connect with all of that joy, inspiration, and hope. Instead, she'll be in a situation that's restrictive. For example, these are a few things. So we'll stop there for a second as far as with the chart analysis, but you can see how very simply I just did a couple things. Couple principles that I stacked. There's a couple of them here, 3 or 4, 5 maybe, but it's very simple, and things that anyone after, 7, 8 weeks in the astrology course would start to be able to do. I talked about the rising sign, which is how we read the chart in Vedic astrology. We start with the rising sign and the qualities of the rising sign. I just talked about a couple. There are others that are also very important, but I talked about some of the important ones. The element, it's fiery. The guna, it's sattvic, so it means sattvic fire. Sattvic fire means motivated toward goodness, and fire, to pursue it with inspiration and individual strength, individual purpose, right? Sattvic fire, ruled by Jupiter. Again, Jupiter is also sattvic and inspirational, inspiring, wanting to lead, wanting to be a guide, wanting to show the higher purpose of things, wanting to find the higher purpose, first for herself, and then lead others to it and show it, right? And then we moved on to where does that energy go? Because everything, the thing to understand with that's very important, and it's a very important principle, is the signs are expressions of the planets. The planets rule everything. The planets rule everything. So that those qualities of Sagittarius, of being inspiring and hopeful and fiery, can only operate in accordance with how its ruler, which is Jupiter, is able to function, right? So this is why after I said the qualities of the rising sign, your nature is to find this and to incarnate, you've incarnated to bring these things out. So now your strategy for doing that, however, is in Capricorn, which is awareness of limitation, the awareness of problems and restrictions and endings, and it could be kind of heavy, which can hold back your sense of hope and purpose. And then it's also retrograde, which means your identity, because the ruling planet is our identity planet. The path to your identity is confusing, and you have the ruler there. Saturn is also there, so it's dominating. So you're going to feel somewhat dominated by this heaviness that's not really your true nature underneath it all. So just this little exercise shows a lot of these principles. Again, the principle of distance, because Saturn is there, right? So it's right next to it. Saturn is also retrograde. So also getting, being able to handle that heaviness without having it be so fearful and without having it be so somewhat, you might say, even neurotic, which is not the best word to use. I would never say that to a client, but that's kind of the way you would understand it, like just being overtaken with stress and nerves and depression. So there could be depression here, because Saturn brings what can make us depressed, because we're aware that we're going to die, and we're aware of things that are heavy that we need to face. We need to face our mortality. So again, these you can use these simple principles and just kind of stack them. By the way, I didn't get into houses, so we'll take it a next step. So that ruling planet goes into your second house, right? Because this is the first, this is the second house, if I were talking to Diana. So once we have a rising sign, then the signs become houses. Sagittarius is the first house because it's the rising sign, which is the moment she was born. Rising sign is the moment we were placed on the wheel of karma. So the moment you were born, this is why you need an accurate birth time. accurate birth time. Again, this is another principle, which is the one of, well, speed, and also, well, we don't even have timing. I guess we don't have that one, but this is just an accurate, you know, an accurate moment of birth. So we need to know the moment, because we were somewhere on Earth, and we need to know exactly when and where we incarnated. That's what starts the cycle. And so then once we know the rising sign, then the rising sign becomes the first house, again, which is our physical body, our appearance, our unique identity in this lifetime. Then each house follows. The second house is our family, our self-esteem and our value system. Third house is our interests and our desires, and on and on. So we would say that your ruling planet goes into the second house, which is about your values, your close friends and family, your money and wealth, your self-esteem, self-respect. So these will be big themes in her life. It will revolve a lot around her family, her income and wealth, her values, and this also includes things like the food we eat. I believe she had an eating disorder, if I'm not mistaken. She had issues with food, but certainly issues with self-esteem, self-respect. In the early years of the marriage, for quite a bit of the marriage, she was somewhat suffering because Charles wasn't as attentive as she would like, and they really weren't a great match. And so, but, you know, she married pretty well. She married someone who was going to be the King of England, so she was on course to be Queen of England, which is pretty remarkable. And so then we start to look at other factors, like for instance, if we want to look at someone's relationships. Again, there's principle. Now we start looking at the houses, and we want to say, okay, when we want to evaluate someone's relationship, then there are ways to do that. And again, the principles and the way we stack the principles are really quite simple. After we learn to read this kind of a chart, which is really quite simple, first house, second house, third, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the seventh house is the partner, and this brings in very clear the principle of opposition. Again, we start to stack that principle. Now we can take all of those things that we just did with this house, this sign, and we can apply all of those things now to not her, but her partner, and how she sees the partner. So then we take that principle of opposition, which is what a partner is. It's the opposite. And you can see, this is her. Let's say she's like looking this way, and the partner is here, looking back. Right? First house, I'm here, and right now this camera is looking at me, but it's as if you're all looking at me, right? So me and the others. Here, looking, and then looking back. So then we would evaluate the partners. Well, she's got quite a partner up here. This is Mercury, so her partners will be Mercury-like, or her partnerships will have a mercurial quality. You see, Mercury was also retrograde, so he was also moving backwards, so there'll be confusion about the partner. But this is actually very strong placement because, again, like I said, the planets actually rule the different signs. The signs originate from the planets. All of these signs are masculine and feminine qualities of the planets that rule them. Again, this is another principle of polarity. Simple idea that the planets, except for the sun and moon, they rule a paired they rule one pair in themselves. The sun and the moon are a pair. Sun and moon here, but then every other planet rules a masculine and a feminine sign. But the sun is masculine with no feminine opposite. Its counterpart, I should have said, I couldn't get the word, is the moon. So sun and moon are in themselves a polarity. The moon is purely feminine. There's no masculine quality of the moon. And the sun is purely masculine. There's no feminine quality of the sun. But every other planet has a masculine and feminine quality to their nature. Mercury rules the masculine sign of Gemini and the feminine sign of Virgo. So the masculine nature of Mercury flows through Gemini, and that's this sign. So Mercury is in his own sign. So anytime a planet is in its own sign, it's very powerful. It gives great results. It shows like the sort of culmination of that thing. So she winds up with